Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 2, Text number 9. Text 9 has no purport, so I'll read by myself, and text 10 we will chant together. Shishya ime bhagavatah paritah patanti gayanti samasarahasyam ajasramisham yusmachikha vilulitaha sumano abhivrishtihi sarve bhajanti rishigana iva veda shakhaha. Translation. Seeing the bumblebees following Purva Chitti, Maharaj Agnidra said, "My dear Lord, the bumblebees surrounding your body are like disciples surrounding your worshipable self. They are incessantly chanting the mantras of the Samaveda and the Upanishads, thus offering prayers to you. Just as great sages resort to the branches of Vedic literatures, the bumblebees are enjoying the showers of flowers falling from your hair." Text 10. Vacham param charana panjara tittirinam. Vacham param charana panjara tittirinam. Brahman arupa mukhara śrīmad-Bhāgavatam tubhyam. Brahman arupa mukharam śrīmad-Bhāgavatam tubhyam. Labdha kadambha ruchihi ankavitanka bimbe. Labdha kadamba ruchiranka vitanka bimbe. Yasyam alata paridhihi kva cha valkalam te. Yasyam alata paridhihi kva cha valkalam te. Yasyam alata paridhi kva cha valkalam te. Vacham param charana panjara tittirinam. Brahman arupa mukharam śrīmad-Bhāgavatam tubhyam. Labdha kadamba ruchiranka vitanka bimbe. Yasyam alata paridhi kva cha valkalam te. Vacham param charana panjara tittirinam. Brahman arupamukaram shrunvama tubhyam. Labdha kadambaruchiranka vitanka bimbe. Yasyamalata paridhi kvacha valkalam te. Vacham param charana panjara tittirinam. Brahman arupa mukharam shranavama tubhyam. Labdha kadambaruchiranka vitanka bimbe. Yasyamalata paridhi kvacha valkalam te. Vacham param charana panjara tittirinam. Vacham param charana panjara tittirinam. Bimbe. Yasyamalata paridhi. Vacham, there is sounding vibration. Param, only. Charana panjara, of the ankle bells. Tittirinam, of the tittiri birds. Brahman, O Brahmana. Arupa, without form. Mukharam, able to very distinctly heard. Shrunavama, I hear. Tubhyam, your. Labdha, gotten. Kadamba, like the kadamba flower. Ruchihi, lovely color. Ankavitanka bimbe, on the beautiful circular hips. Yasyam, on which. Alata paridihi, encirclement of burning cinders. Qua, where. Cha, also. Valkalam, covering cloth. Te, your. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. O Brahmana, I can simply hear the tinkling of your ankle bells. Within those bells, tittiri birds seem to be chirping among themselves. Although I do not see their forms, I can hear how they are chirping. When I look at your beautiful circular hips, I see they are lovely color. They are the lovely color of kadamba flowers. And your waist is encircled by a belt of burning cinders. Indeed, you seem to have forgotten to dress yourself. Translation with repetition. O Brahmana, I can simply hear the tinkling of your ankle bells. Within those bells, titiri birds seem to be chirping among themselves. Although I do not see their forms, I can hear how they are chirping. When I look at your beautiful circular hips, I see they are the lovely color of kadamba flowers, and your waist is encircled by a belt of burning cinders. Indeed, you seem to have forgotten to dress yourself. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. With lusty desires to see Purvachitti, Agnidra especially gazed upon the girl's attractive hips and waist. When a man looks upon a woman with such lusty desires, he is captivated by her face, her breasts, and her waist. For a woman first attracts a man to fulfill his sexual desires by the beautiful features of her face, by the beautiful slope of her breasts, and also by her waist. Purvachitti was dressed in fine yellow silk, and therefore her hips looked like kadamba flowers. Because of her belt, her waist seemed to be encircled by burning cinders. She was fully dressed, but Agnidra had become so lusty that he asked, "Why have you come naked?" Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militanyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, here in this chapter, the activities of Maharaj Agnidra, we are reading about Agnidra performing austerities in the forest. And to fulfill his desire, Lord Brahma has sent a heavenly damsel, Purvachitti, and she has come very close to him. He is now disturbed in his meditation, and now he is speaking these words to her. He is very poetic. All these things that are going on in his mind, he's quite bewildered. He's not able to see properly. He's thinking Purvachitti is some kind of a sage, a brahmana. so bewildered. And he's all the different things that are happening in his heart, he's very nicely, in a very poetic way, he's expressing. Vacham param charana panjara tittirinam. She's wearing ankle bells which are tinkling, and he has heard them, and he is thinking, this must be some birds, tittiri birds, captured in the ankle bells, and they are chirping. Oh, so pleasing it is to hear, like the chirping of a bird. Arupa mukharam shrunavama tubhyam. Arupa. I don't see them. I don't see the birds. But mukharam shrunavama. And I'm able to hear clearly. Charana panjara tittirinam. Charana panjara, her ankle bells. Vacham, the sound, I'm able to hear. Tittiri is a kind of a bird, Prabhupada has said, of tittiri birds. Labdha kadamba ruchiranka vitanka bimbe. And I'm seeing your waist. They're of kadamba ruchiranka vitanka bimbe. Probably she is dressed in some reddish cloth. So he's saying that they are looking like kadamba flowers. And yasyama lata paridhi. And vitanka bimbe, looking at her waist, alata paridhi. She's wearing a belt, probably a golden belt. And so it is looking for him like a circle of encirclement of burning cinders, glowing cinder, glowing coal. So like that, it's bright and very beautiful. And then he is saying, Kvacha valkalam te. And where has your valkalam, covering cloth, dress usually of a sage performing austerities, valkalam, where has it gone? And you seem to have forgotten to dress yourself, he is saying. O Brahmana, Brahman, I can simply hear the tinkling of your ankle bells. I can simply hear Shrunavama of your ankle bells. Charana panjara tittiri, charana panjara tubhyam paranachin. Charana panjara Shrunavama. I'm hearing. Within those bells, tittiri birds seem to be chirping among themselves. Charana panjara tittirinam Shrunavama tubhyam. I'm able to hear Shrunavama. Although I do not see their forms, arupa, I can't see the birds. I can hear how they are chirping. Arupa mukharam Shrunavama tubhyam. Brahman, O Brahmana. When I look at your beautiful circular hips, Anka vitanka bimbe, kadamba ruchira. I see they are the lovely color of kadamba flowers. And your waist is encircled by a belt of burning cinders, alata paridhi. Indeed, you seem to have forgotten to dress yourself. Kvacha valkalam te. Where has your dress gone? He is asking. So, Srila Prabhupada has mentioned in the purport the different mental situation that Agnidra is going through. in the presence of a heavenly damsel like Purvachitti. And Prabhupada has mentioned that these are all the features of a woman that can capture the mind of a man. When a man looks upon a woman with lusty desires, it is a man who looks upon a woman with lusty desires, he is captivated by her face, her breasts, her waist, and so on. And for a woman first attracts a man to fulfill his sexual desires by her beautiful features. So, for spiritualists, we are practicing Krishna consciousness. For us who are in spiritual life, controlling the senses, controlling the mind is absolutely important. And hence, one has to be very careful about these things. Krishna explains in the Gita, Dhyayato vishayan pumsam sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kama. Krishna's whole purpose in that analysis is to tell us the power of kama. In the 3rd chapter also in the Bhagavad-gita, towards the end of 3rd chapter, Krishna concludes and tells about the power of kama. Kama is very powerful force which can blind the living entity, as it has blinded Agnidra now. He was very well-being, he was performing austerities, but now he has let himself to a stage where kama has overtaken him and he is bewildered and he is not able to see properly. So, Krishna explains, it all begins with dhyayataha. Dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kamam kamat krodho vijayate. Before kama comes into the heart, comes an attachment, some kind of an attraction. An attraction is triggered by dhyayataha vishayan. If one contemplates on the objects of senses. So these are the objects of senses. For a man, a woman's different features are objects which can trigger his lusty desires. So, dhyayataha, if one meditates, if one contemplates, dhyayataha means dhyana, to pay attention and contemplate on the different features of a woman. Immediately attachment comes, and from attachment comes kama, and once there is kama, it comes with a certain force. And hence the first step is to avoid contemplation on the vishayan. Now we see how in modern civilization, when there is no understanding of spiritual life, understanding of the principles of spiritual life, how it is essential to control the senses for spiritual activities to be flourishing in the society. When such understanding is not there, the society is built on terms simply which can increase sense gratification. That's why everywhere we see around, there are objects of senses, objects for sense, vishaya, being highly celebrated and glorified and presented in multiple forms, simply to trigger the lusty desires of a man. On the other hand, in Vedic culture, where spiritual life was prominent, this understanding existed. Of course, there were men and women, there were grihasthas, there was household life. But at the same time, they knew that all of this kind of sensual enjoyment has a place, and an overindulgence in that will deride my spiritual practices, and I have to be careful about it. So, dhyayataha, here Krishna is pointing out cause-effect. One leads to the other. This leads to the other. And hence, if you want to be careful, be very careful. The first step is dhyayataha. So for as spiritualists, it's an important instruction from the Lord. In 1999, our temple had just been built, our temple was inaugurated. And at that time, you're all familiar that how the Guru issue had come up. And we had a lot of debate and discussion was going on among our devotees in the temple. So at that time, coincidentally, one very, very powerful Guru of ISKCON had just fallen. And of course, he had done wonderful service, no doubt about it. He had done great service. But unfortunately, he had become a victim of lust, and he had given up his principles, as sannyas principles. But then those days, and I think even now, the idea is to somehow suppress such news. You can imagine 99, it was not internet, social media, none of those things were there. It was not so easy for the news to come. Email was there. So, the first thing that we were told was that he was doing so much preaching and he was under so much stress that there is a complete breakdown and he is now isolated, and some devotees are helping him come out of the stress of preaching. Actually, what was happening was none of those things were true. We really were believing like that. Oh, so sad. He must be under so much preaching stress like that. Of course, later on, one of the devotees, Yashomati Nandan Das, who passed away recently, he wrote a mail. No, why are you all talking about preaching stress and all that? Prabhupada has clearly pointed out, you do this, this happens. You do this, this happens. And he was having some problem, some back problem or something. As a sannyasi, he was having a woman masseur to massage him. So, Yashomati Nandan Prabhu wrote that if a sannyasi has a woman masseur, or anybody has a man has a woman, what will happen? Cause effect. You cannot see, he will fall down. It is not any preaching stress or any such thing. But at that time, the whole mood was that, he's come under so much preaching stress. So Prabhupada told a story. There was a man, he was sitting on a tree. He was sitting on a tree branch. The trunk was there. The trunk was there. And he was sitting on a tree. And then he was sawing it. The trunk was there and the branch was coming out. He was sitting on this side of the tree branch and he was sawing it. Somebody saw him and they said, "Hey, what a fool you are. As you are sawing, you're going to fall down." Right? You're sitting on a tree like that and he's sitting like this and he's sawing. This is the tree. You know what's going to happen? he looked at the man who warned him, "You're going to fall." Say, "Get lost. Nothing is going to happen to me." And he kept sawing. And then you know what happened after some time? The branch gave way and he fell off. And suddenly when he fell off, he ran around. Where is that man? He must be some kind of an astrologer. How nicely he could predict. He went around and caught him and he said, "Are you some astrologer? So you must be a great astrologer, you can predict so well." He said, No. So like that, Prabhupada said, it's foolish. There is a cause effect. If you cannot see that, if I do this kind of a thing, this will happen. So when Krishna is warning, dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu upajayate. So we have to be careful in spiritual life. We cannot take for granted, and our interaction with the vishayan, objects of sense gratification in the material world, when we are dealing with it, we have to be very careful. So this kind of an idea that, he came under a lot of stress, preaching stress, and that's why he is now locked up, and then after a few days or weeks or so, more and more news came out, trickling out, and then we found that no, and then he had abandoned his sannyas principles. He was removed, and he had a lot of disciples, thousands of disciples in Europe, in Russia, and all of them became bewildered. This kind of thing has happened again and again in ISKCON. So, but usually it used to get covered up, and of course a few devotees would call out and say, no, the truth is this. Why are you simply saying something else? So like this, one has to be very careful. And Prabhupada is saying here, when a man looks upon a woman with such lusty desires, that is why Krishna explains in the Gita, prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan. The lusty desires, it comes in the mind of a man. And with that lusty desire, when one looks at things, then it triggers karma. So, at the very first instance, we must be careful about contemplation and avoid contemplation. That's why in brahmacharya life it is supposed to be a very protected life. So there is practically no interaction with women, except of course maybe for some service. But otherwise it's a very, very protected environment. But of course in modern times we go out for preaching. So the principle is that one has to be careful not to contemplate on the objects of the senses. Although material world is organized in such a way that the objects of senses are on display everywhere, because the material world, modern society, they don't know these principles of spiritual life. Even the pious people who organize this material world, even they don't know. And they organize it in this way because they think that life is meant for enjoyment, and maybe we should do it in a pious manner, in a God-fearing manner. We should always recognize God, seek God's blessings, and we should enjoy life in this world. You see, that is the attitude of a karmi. Karmi means he's he's a believer of God. He has faith in God. He worships God. But he thinks, by the worship and the blessing of God, I must enjoy this world. Whereas a devotee of Krishna, he worships God. he seeks God's blessing to understand the purpose of life, to understand one's relationship with God, and to understand how to revive my relationship with God. This is the difference between a devotee and a karmi. Karmi is also devoted to God. Karmi worships God. He has belief in God. He also does pious activities. He'll be going to temples. But his background is that I want to enjoy material life with the blessings of God. A spiritualist, a devotee on the other hand, he has understood the purpose of life and he wants to avoid sense gratification, seek the blessings of God to revive our relationship with God and go back to Godhead. So that is the important difference, and hence it begins by contemplation. And when you contemplate with a lusty desire, with a lusty mind, with an attitude of enjoyment, that is the most important thing. So that is why Krishna says, prajaha manogatan. It is born in the mind. It is created in the mind. And even Prahalad Maharaj says, Kandutivan manasijam vishaheta dhira. Manasijam. Again, it is created in the mind. I'll give you one example. For a long time I used to think about this. Manasijam, manogatan, created in the mind. How is this created in the mind? Long ago, I was at that time a brahmachari. I used to go to Mysore from here to print Kannada books. I had found out printing cost in Bangalore was higher than printing cost in Mysore. Mysore is a small town, labor is cheaper. Bangalore, labor is expensive. So I had done some calculation and somebody had advised me. And so we were printing for some time books in Mysore and bringing them here. So I used to go by the public transport bus to Mysore. So one day, as a brahmachari, I was going alone. There was no one else with me. So I went to the bus stand. I got a ticket. And then I went into the bus and I sat. And it was not a crowded bus. Bus was still waiting, more and more passengers were coming. And I took a window seat. And I was sitting there on the seat next to me. Only two people sit, those kind of buses. Not the bucket seats that you have these days. Those days, they were all simple bench-like, simple seats. So I was sitting and I was, being brahmachari, I was conscious who's going to come and sit next to me. I should be careful. And so I was looking at the outside at the window and I was seeing so many people coming. And I saw a young woman also come by. And I was very concerned, what if she comes and sits next to me? Next 3 hours I'll be sitting in the bus. So I came and I was looking outside and then as I could see, somebody came and sat next to me. Just a few seconds after that woman had passed by. So I thought, maybe she has come and oh, my bad luck today. So, and then I didn't want to agitate my senses, being very careful. Like that I was just still turned away. And then a bus started and the bus was jostling. And at some time, the shoulder touched and I became, oh my God. Should be so careful as the senses are. It's so much, you see how that pleasure comes with all that. Just by a touch, pleasure comes. And then, some legs are touched. Oh, again. I'm imagining all these things. And then after maybe 15 minutes, and then I looked, it was a man there. But you see how it was all manasijam. In my mind I was thinking, oh, the touch of the shoulder, oh, it's giving me so much pleasure, I should avoid the pleasure, I'm a brahmachari, I should control. See, all these things, it's all manasijam. It's actually a man. Nothing, I can touch his shoulder, nothing is going to happen to me. But it's all mind that creates these things. So manasijam vishaheta dhira. Manogatan, it's a whole concoction. Mind creates, oh, this is a beautiful thing, that's a beautiful, and then so that contemplation leads to kama and attachment to kama, and when there is kama, lusty desires, we make a big issue of stupid things in this world. So that is why here you can see Agnidra, how he has been swept away by the forces of kama. So, in our Krishna conscious life, because we are all doing different things, how do we ensure that we are doing the right work in the right way so that Krishna is pleased? Towards the end of the Bhagavad-gita, in the 18th chapter, now Krishna is coming almost to the conclusion. Right? He has spoken 17 chapters and a good amount of the 18th chapter. Now Krishna wants final action from Arjuna. Right? So in the 18th chapter, Krishna begins to concentrate on how one has to work. These are very, very important verses for us in spiritual life. I'll try to cover quickly. So 1856. So you can imagine towards the end of the Bhagavad-gita, end of the 18th chapter. Krishna is saying, Sarva karmanyapi sadha kurvano madvyapashrayaha mat prasadad avapnoti shashvatam padamavyayam. This is a very, very important instruction. Here Krishna is saying, Sarva karmanyapi sadha. Sarva karmani, all kinds of activities we may be engaged in, sada, always, kurvano madvyapashrayaha. Always do it under my protection, my shelter, madvyapashrayaha. Mat prasadad avapnoti. And by my prasada, by my mercy, avapnoti, you will attain. What is that? Shashvatam padamavyayam. Eternal shelter, eternal padamavyayam. And Prabhupada points out that padam avyayam refers to the spiritual world and association of Krishna. Shashvatam padamavyayam, that eternal position in the association of the Lord. And how do we achieve that? Mat prasadad avapnoti. By Krishna's mercy this becomes possible. For who? For one who works under his shelter. Sarva karmanyapi sadha kurvano madvyapashrayaha. And Prabhupada explains in the purport, to be free from material contamination, a pure devotee acts under the direction of the Supreme Lord or his representative, the spiritual master. So, to be free from material contamination, a pure devotee acts under the direction of the Supreme Lord or his representative. We are supposed to act under the direction of the Supreme Lord or his representative, right? The spiritual master. And Prabhupada explains further in the next purport. Now one may argue that Arjuna was acting under the personal direction of Krishna. But when Krishna is not present, how should one act? Arjuna was very fortunate. He was standing beside him and telling him what he should do when he was in the dilemma. Now, how do we act? Because one may argue Arjuna was acting under the personal direction of Krishna. Directly, personally, Krishna was present. We don't have that benefit. But whatever Krishna has spoken in the Bhagavad-gita is supposed to be universal knowledge. It is applicable, it is relevant for all times, for everyone, including us now. How is it relevant? How can we practice that? So Prabhupada himself is brought. Now one may argue that Arjuna was acting under the personal direction of Krishna, but when Krishna is not present, how should one act? And Prabhupada answers, if one acts according to the direction of Krishna in this book, in the Bhagavad-gita, as well as under the guidance of the representative of Krishna, then the result will be the same. So Prabhupada is pointing out two things. One is, if one acts according to the direction of Krishna in this book, so Krishna's instruction in the Bhagavad-gita, and if we act according to that, as well as, second thing, under the guidance of the representative of Krishna, then the result will be the same. So in other words, to work according to Krishna's directions in the Gita and according to the orders of the spiritual master is absolutely essential. Then we can say, Madhyapashrayaha sarvani karma sarva karmanyapi sadha. We may be engaged in different kinds of activities. How do we ensure we are under the direction of the spiritual master? Now, this is one of the brilliant things that Prabhupada has done, that he created an institution. And he created an institution of his followers, of his disciples. And he made a system, an institutionalized system of how his direction will still be available. And his books, he wrote his books. He had disciples, and he created an institutional format. So Prabhupada's institutional format is very simple. He said there should be GBC, and the GBCs are one level of leaders, and the second level of leaders are the temple presidents. And the temple president has to work under the direction of the GBC. And the GBCs have to follow certain principles. They should be very strict. In fact, one time in 1977, Prabhupada said the GBCs should be Acharya-like. That was the expectation that Prabhupada had. They follow Prabhupada's instructions very seriously as he has given, and they work in a consultative mode on some very serious matters, and they are strong and strict in their practice, and they give direction to the temple president. The temple president also has similar obligation to be following Prabhupada's principles. And if we do this in a very mystical manner, Prabhupada's instruction, guidance will come from his books and from the instructions of the systems created by Srila Prabhupada in his institution. So I'll read this last part. While acting in such a way, one should, however, note that after doing something whimsically, he should not offer the result to the Supreme Lord. That sort of duty is not in the devotional service of Krishna consciousness. One should act according to the order of Krishna. This is a very important point. See, we have to act according to the order of Krishna. Arjuna was acting according to the order of Krishna. Krishna was right there next to him. For us, this is very important point. The order of Krishna comes through disciplic succession from the bona fide spiritual master. This is the principle. The order of Krishna comes through disciplic succession from the bona fide spiritual master. Therefore, the spiritual master's order should be taken as the prime duty of life. If one gets a bona fide spiritual master and acts according to his direction, then his perfection of life in Krishna consciousness is guaranteed. Actually, Prabhupada was physically present up to 1977. As we all know, we observed his disappearance day. Most of his disciples were about 5 years, 8 years, maybe maximum 10 years in Krishna consciousness. And they were all young people. Now, after Prabhupada has left physically, where will they get direction from Prabhupada? Even now there are many Prabhupada disciples after 40 years. And last 40 years, how are they getting direction from Prabhupada? Because it says one has to get direction from the bona fide spiritual master. It was through the institutional system that Prabhupada has created. And the same thing can continue after 1977. There is no need of any change. So, what was working post-77 for disciples of Prabhupada who were initiated by Prabhupada pre-1977 can also work for the disciples who are initiated after 77. The same principles of Krishna consciousness. And that is why the institution is important. Prabhupada's books are important. The different levels of leadership is important. And the leadership following Prabhupada's instructions is important. If these are all spiritually tied up together, Prabhupada has assured, I will be your personal guide, whether physically present or not. Just as I am receiving instructions from my spiritual master even now. Prabhupada made this statement in 1977. 1936, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had passed away. 35 years later, 40 years later, Prabhupada was making that statement. Just as I am receiving instruction from my spiritual master, because physical time, distance, all these things don't matter in spiritual affairs. And Prabhupada demonstrated that, and we are very fortunate that we are working. We have a bona fide spiritual master, a pure devotee, exactly as described in the Vedic literatures, Srila Prabhupada. And if we work under his direction, as he has created an institutional format of receiving his direction and working, then we will be mat-vyapashrayaha. We will be always under the protection of the Lord. And mat-prasadadavapnoti shashvatam padam avyayam. And by the grace, by the blessing of Krishna, we will attain spiritual perfection. We'll stop here. Grantaraj Srimad-Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.